Yesterday in Rochester DMC, the paper, on the editorial page came this written by somebody in Brighton. And it says, when love stands up to angry rhetoric. And I'm thinking, oh, that sounds interesting. The kind of angry talks going on these days. I'd like to hear what they do. Some churches teach that pride is a sin. But at First Baptist Church of Rochester, my summer has been full of pride. Anybody ever been to Rochester? First Baptist Church of Rochester? Have you?
Years and years.
Years ago. Yeah, well, I think it's a good thing you got out of there. Oh, I shouldn't have said that right way.
1 of 10.
Oh, well, you're forgiven then. Okay. You're safe. It goes on. In July, a portion of our congregation marched together with other Baptist congregations in the Rochester Pride Parade. You know what the Pride Parade is? Everybody knows? Okay. And then a few years ago, the church decided to become what we call Baptist Welcoming and Affirming. That is a confession that we are welcoming of all people, but arises out of a need to make particular mention of our welcome and affirmation for LGBTQ persons. You know who they are? Does everybody know who I can't even remember all the initials. LGBTQ persons? This is the sexual perversion group. Okay, you got the picture now? Well, I love coming here, and I don't believe I'm going to the Baptist Church in Rochester, not even once. On August 13, a pair of protesters greeted us outside the sanctuary after worship. Their words were hateful. I knew they were angry and hurt, and only a day after protesters caused bodily harm in Charlottesville, we were all worried. To my delight, the fine people of First Baptist did not return the hostile rhetoric, but instead offered a welcoming hand and invited our protesters in for conversation. That's what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid of a church that calls us a Baptist church. I don't know anything more about that church than what I just read. But when you march in a pride parade, it tells me something about what you sacrifice in the authority of Scripture. That's what I'm terrified of. That's what really scares me. That stares me down to the quick. It's very much like the protesters today. I don't know where you stand on the Confederate statues and all that. They're tearing them down hand over fist. They do it in the middle of the night. I'm afraid that some people have sacrificed what they think they know about some of these monuments that are erected to notable people, and neglected the good that they did. Even though they were wrong in the Confederacy and the support of the South, they were some remarkable people. Stonewall Jackson, one of the most important generals of the Civil War on the southern side, was one of the most remarkable Christian men in the entire war, in the entire country, North or South. If you know nothing about Stonewall Jackson, he was not only a remarkable military strategist, but he was a devout Christian. On the nights leading up to a major campaign or major battle, Stonewall Jackson assembled his senior staff and they prayed all night long. And occasionally he would get on his horse and he would ride to the very front toward twilight the night before a battle, and he would sit on his horse and pray with his aides. Now, he may have been misdirected politically, and his misunderstanding of all men are created equal, but he was a remarkably devout Christian man. He, out of his own pocket, people don't know this about some of these really, truly remarkable men that they're tearing monuments. Sure, they were far from perfect, but they had remarkable testimonies in other areas. Stonewall Jackson felt that his soldiers needed good leadership militarily and politically, but he felt so convicted that his soldiers needed a good leader spiritually that out of his own pocket he created a ministry team in which he paid preachers, pastors, and ministers and assigned them to different divisions in the whole Confederate Army so that revivals were held in those Confederate camps. People came to know Christ. Now, I'm not about to make a comment about their politics in the defense of slavery, but I know that there are many of them who did remarkable good. I'm not here to argue or make a case for keeping up or tearing down the statues. But oftentimes there is so little we know about what's going on that the ones with the loudest voices are the ones that prevail. That terrifies me. In the Rochester Baptist Church, they say love prevails. Do you know that, and there's a quote at the bottom of the sheet that says by Warren Wiersbe that I just passed to you, that truth without love is brutality, and love without truth is hypocrisy. In this church in Rochester, loving everyone without telling them that they're engaged in sin is deep, radical, loud hypocrisy, which says they do not know what Scripture teaches about sin. We all just ought to love everybody. Well, what happens if you want to turn to 1 Samuel 13, what happens in our culture, and has been happening for a long, long time, is that Christians have become fearful creatures. We're nothing more, I don't mean us here, but the church, the American church, has become afraid to express the truth in God's Word about the consequences of sin. And because we become intimidated by the loudest voices, we shut up. And we huddle in our churches. And we're afraid to speak the truth. And secondly, we're not sure how to speak the truth in love. To a culture that says we are bigoted, we are racist, we are white supremacists, that we are myth believers. In 1 Samuel chapter 13, something quite remarkable happens to the people of Israel. Saul has just been made king over the protests of Samuel. But the people demand a king. We're going to go back to chapter 12 in a moment. But what happens is they want a king just like every other country has a king. Which means you get a human being. And if you get a human being, you get someone pretty imperfect. And Saul is pretty imperfect. So let me just read a little bit out of this. I'm in the NIV, so our versions may not be exactly corresponding. Saul was 30 years old when he became king, and he reigned over Israel 42 years. Saul, by the way, had been on the throne for around a year, as the commentators suggest, when verse 2 takes place. Saul chose 3,000 men from Israel. 2,000 were with him at Michmash and in the hill country of Bethel, and 1,000 were with Jonathan at Gibeah in Benjamin. The rest of the men he sent back to their homes. Saul has an army of what? 3,000 people. Not a very huge army. Jonathan, Saul's son, verse 3, goes out I love children, you know what? You can always count on children to goof things up. Jonathan, he goes out and attacks the Philistine outpost at Geba. Well, the Philistines, of course, heard about it. It's like picking on the bullies of the neighborhood littlest sister. That's what Jonathan did. Well, that just made the Philistines angry as a nest of hornets. And it scared the dickens out of the Hebrew people. And Saul, he says in that verse, and Saul had the trumpet blown throughout the land and said, "Let the Hebrews hear." So all Israel heard the news. Saul has attacked the Philistine outpost. Now Israel has become a stench to the Philistines, and the people were summoned to join him at Gilgal. The fighting people were assigned to meet him at Gilgal. Saul knew the Philistines were brewing for a big fight. Once and for all, they'll wipe these Israelites right off the face of the map. They've had it. Well, the Philistines assembled to fight Israel with 3,000 chariots, 6,000 charioteers, and soldiers as numerous as the sand on the seashore. And they went up and camped at Michmash, east of Beth-aven. Well, this is a beautiful scene. Can you imagine the 3,000 well, we don't know the exact number of Saul's army at this point, but they don't have, at this stage in the history of Israel, they don't have weapons like the Philistines do. They haven't developed swords, shields, spears made of iron, any of those things. They're mostly farmers, tilling the ground, shepherds. So what happens here is they're camped in Michmash on one side. Over here comes the Philistines. Thousands of them. All they see is dust rising up. And they're like, "Oh, baby, we're in trouble. we did a bad thing. We never should have provoked these Philistines because these are not nice people. And they're going to get their pound of flesh in revenge." Well, if you were an Israelite and you saw this, and you didn't have a sword, a spear, a shield, no armor, no helmet, no nothing, you're just a farmer, came in from the fields to help defend your people, and you saw this amazing modern army coming toward you in a cloud of dust, what might your reaction be? Probably the same as these guys. Next verse. Well, when the men of Israel saw that their situation was critical, I don't know what it said in your version, but I love the understatement of the translators here, that it was critical, and that their army was hard-pressed. It's almost as though God has a sense of humor. No, the people of Israel were about to be wiped off the face of the planet. That's what's about to happen here. The people of Israel, God's people, with their new king, instead of taking courage, hid in caves and thickets, among the rocks, and in pits and cisterns. Some Hebrews even crossed the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. But Saul remained at Gilgal, and all the troops with him were quaking with fear. I hope you agree that they had reason to fear. But he did, didn't they? I mean, their chances of survival was meager. Their chances of victory were virtually non-existent. Saul was really pretty much unproven in battle. Jonathan, as we find out later, was the only one that seemed to have courage. But look at what the people did because of fear. Leading up to fear, a battle has been enjoined. A battle has been engaged. Jonathan was bold enough to take the battle to the enemy. And when he did, that inflamed the enemy. Let me tell you something. Let me draw you a quick parallel. If you go on Geneseo campus and you want to talk about how homosexuality, lesbianism, transgender, all that is a sin against God, given quite clearly in Scripture, you will have walked into a hornet's nest you'll be lucky to get out of. When you speak God's truth about some of these issues, even in love, the enemy will come right against you and try to wipe you out. I know this from personal experience. You have every right to be afraid, Israel, because you're about to get your teeth kicked in. So, the results of having this fear is that you shrink back. In verses 6 and 7, you shrink back from the enemy. You shrink back from the battle. You withdraw. You decide, we can't win this battle, we're going to get killed. Do you know that if you persist in going on Geneseo's campus and talking about the sins that Jesus Christ went on a cross to save you from, whether it's homosexuality or the sin of not loving Jesus Christ in the first place. If you say Jesus Christ is the only way, that He is the way, the truth, and the life, you will be judged intolerant. You'll be disinvited from being a guest on campus. It is a battle that the enemy is stronger. This will sound strange. The enemy is stronger than you are. That scares me. You can't do it on your own. But look what happens. These people are so terrified in verses 6 and 7 that some of the Hebrews even crossed the Jordan River. They escaped their own country and put distance between them and the Philistines. They crossed the Jordan River. We're out of here. We don't care. We're gone. I'm not fighting these guys. We're going to get killed. And then in the last part of verse 7, even Saul's troops were quaking with fear. The results of fear is it causes paralysis. And that paralysis almost meant the defeat of the whole nation of Israel right here at this spot. So what happens? The results of Saul's fear is that he gets, we can look at verses 13 and 14, he decides he can't wait for Samuel to come anymore and make an offering before the battle, so he has to do it himself, which is it's explicitly instructed he is not to do. It would be a sin against God. Do you know the results of that sin of Saul? You know what happened? Because of that one sin, when Samuel comes and finds out the offering has already been made, Samuel says, "You will not be king." That Jonathan will not be the heir to the throne, that God is choosing a man after His own heart. This one sin of Saul. Sin is a terrifying thing. So what to do? What did the Hebrews forget that they should have learned? If you turn back to chapter 12, look at verses 12 through 15. Samuel has come to them and he reminds them. Now this is before 13 and 12. He comes to them and he says, "Hey, listen, people." He says, "When you saw Nahash, king of the Ammonites, was moving against you, you said to me, 'No, we want a king to rule over us, even though the Lord your God is your king. Now here is the king you have chosen, the one you asked for. See, the Lord has set a king over you.'" follow the Lord your God. That's good. But if you do not obey the Lord, and if you rebel against his commands, his hand will be against you as it was against your fathers. They should be learning something. There's a learning curve here for most of us. And the learning curve is sharp in chapter 12, where Samuel says, okay, you'll get a king. But here's the caveat. If you do not fear God, trust God, obey God, you're going to go downhill. This is what you have to do. You don't have to fear the Ammonites. You don't have to fear the Philistines. You don't have to fear the Canaanites. You don't have to fear anything. Because your God will be king and Lord over your king. Verse 24, here's a key verse. He says this, but be sure to fear the Lord and serve him faithfully with all your heart. Consider what great things he has done for you. But in verse 25, if you persist in doing evil, both you and your king will be swept away. Can I just suggest to you that what the Hebrews should have learned is that this is something that's very contemporary and has its application today for us. Is if you take your eyes, your devotion, your heart, and you direct it at anything else away from Christ, you will be possessed by fear of man. Just as the Hebrews were in chapter 13. They took almost immediately, as soon as Samuel says these words to them, they take their eyes off Christ, off God. And almost immediately, they become terrified of the enemy. It's a scary thing. Application to today is very simple, I think. Is that we are in a culture that is patently, aggressively anti-Christian. There's just no question about it. Are we persecuted? If you're not persecuted right now in this culture, you don't have a very strong testimony. You just don't. And I'll tell you why. Because the enemy is on the offensive. And he's after you. He's after your family. He's after your church. And the only way we as believers can withstand the enemy is to keep our focus on Christ. And be filled with the trust that God is King and Lord over all. Man is nothing to be afraid of. I love this verse from Proverbs chapter 29. That says the fear of man is a snare, but whoever trusts God is safe. Boy, oh boy. Years ago, I don't think I shared this. Years ago, I was invited to be on a panel in a dorm talk in Geneseo. They invited a philosophy professor and a biology professor and me. I was outclassed educationally. I was intimidated by their elevated collegiate record. I wore blue jeans, sneakers, and an InterVarsity t-shirt that says "Pray hard, life is short." And they put me in between these two fellas. I was like a squashed sardine between these two huge whales. And the place was mobbed with students. I'd say there are probably, it was in one of the main meeting areas of, I think it was in Genesee, it might have been in Erie Hall. And the topic as advertised was, what do you think will happen when you die? Well, I was never so fascinated by anything in my whole life. Here I am, little old country boy from Groveland, plopped down in the middle of these philosophy professor and a biology professor, and they asked them first, what do you think is going to happen when you die? Both very well-respected professors. Very well liked, very personable. Here I was in a green t-shirt that said, pray hard, life is short. Oh my goodness. So they asked him, and the philosophy professor says, nothing, everything goes dark. And I'm like, what? You're a philosophy brainiac, and that's the best you can come up with? Everything just go black? So then they asked the biology professor, and I'm thinking, well, something's got to happen here. He's got to have some kind of something about our inner being or something, right? And so he says, I remember it as plain as day, I was asleep long before I was born, and I'll be asleep long after I'm dead. And I'm like, what in the world does that mean, for pity's sake? And so then they asked me, Pastor Dave, what happens when you die? I said, I know what happens. It's going to happen to me. I can't hold court with these two fellas. They got nothing. They got no hope. You know what I got? I got eternal hope in Jesus Christ. I know that if I put my faith and trust in Jesus Christ, that He has promised an eternal home for me with Him. That's hope. That no matter what today's circumstances are, my destiny belongs in heaven because that's where my citizenship is. Well, you should have seen their faces fall open. What did he say? What did he say? And so I shared a little bit of my testimony, and they asked a few more questions, and in an hour the whole thing was over. And the biology teacher went one way, and the philosophy teacher went the other way, and here I was sitting all alone on this table, what used to be only moments before a panel, with a little green t-shirt that says, pray hard, life is short on it. And all of a sudden, all these students started, and I thought, they're going to beat me up. They surrounded me. One question after another. Broken young people without hope. Nothing that the academics could offer was helpful to them at all. They wanted something that would give them hope. The world doesn't offer any kind of hope to human beings at all, especially our young people. And it really is quite remarkable when you can be in a situation where you can share from your heart what it means to be in love with Christ. People will listen. People will listen. They might not believe, they might not be ready to accept, but they will listen. And I found out that night, many, many years ago, that there was nothing to be afraid of from the bio prof or the philosophy prof, because my God is Lord. And He humbled those two men, even though they wouldn't acknowledge it, because not a student, they were respectful of all three of us, but they didn't surround the philosophy professor and the biology professor after the talk was over. They surrounded me because they intuitively knew that I had something that they didn't, and these two other guys didn't have either. Fear can paralyze. So my question sort of is, as we wrap up, what do we fear? Do we fear men? Do we fear? Now, as you can see, I don't go to a barber shop very often. I just don't. Now, I tell some of you ladies do. And God bless you. I'm glad you do. And if that makes you happy, I found out that it makes my wife exceedingly happy, and if I don't notice, it makes me unceasingly punished for not noticing. So, and she'll always come home and ask how she won't ask sometimes, just to see if I'm paying attention. And she'll say, and I don't notice or don't say anything. And about 4 hours later, and I ask, honey, are we having supper tonight? And she'll say, not for you. But when I have a little more hair, I go to the barber shop. Actually, I don't know if there are many barber shops left around. There isn't one in Geneseo. There's hair salons and that sort of thing. And so I go to this one. I got to know the gals pretty good, and they knew me as Pastor Dave. And we got to visit, and then they were easy places. They're younger people, younger women. And they didn't have much to work with here, so we talked a lot. And I could frankly inquire of them what was going on in their lives. And as I prayed before I went in even, God would give me some inclination how I could turn the conversation to spiritual things. I mean, they kind of had to stay there and finish cutting what little hair I had, so they kind of had to listen. And I had to listen to them. But rather than be intimidated by a 25-year-old young woman cutting my hair with sharp instruments near my throat, God gave me an opportunity to share the gospel. So many times. So many times. What do I fear? I have to confess, I am afraid of man. I like to be liked. I don't want other people to think I'm a bigot, a racist, a white supremacist, an intolerant person who can't embrace a whole host of other opinions. I don't want people to think that I'm so narrow-minded that I can't listen to others. And what that does is I keep feeling myself backed into a corner. It's like, if you've ever seen a young person, you give them a paintbrush and a bucket of paint and tell them to paint the porch, and invariably, unless you remind them, they'll paint themselves into a corner. I've seen this happen. It's hilarious. It's embarrassing for the kid, but it's like, what were you thinking? But it's the same way we are sometimes. We allow people, the enemy at work, to paint us into a little tiny corner where now we feel we can't do anything. But what we have to do is go back and say, but I fear God, as the Hebrews should have learned from verse 24 of chapter 12. Fear the Lord. Put your fear in the right direction, and that will demolish any fear you have of anything else. Here's what I'm really afraid of. I'm afraid, and we'll talk about it in the next hour, I'm afraid for the American church. Later I'm going to share with you some interesting information taken from a number of different polls that shouldn't make you fearful, but you should be aware of. That the American church is close to finished. That's what I'm afraid of. That the testimony of Jesus Christ is shrinking rapidly. Rapidly. And we're a part of it. My church in Geneseo is a part of that. This church is a part of that. I've been able to travel to a number of different churches over the course of the summer, the last 4 or 5 months, to a lot of different churches, and I see the same trends. And what I felt in my gut intuitively has been reinforced by some very academic and thorough surveys done both by George Barna, by the Pew Research Council, Pew Report, the United States Census Bureau, all show us a trend that we as a Christian nation have been intimidated, made fearful by man, and that we have lost our fear of God. And we're run by a nation of crazies who really don't fear God or revere His name. That's what we're going to talk about a little bit in the next hour. What can we do about it? Where do we go from here? Fear is a curious thing. I have always wanted to be liked and accepted. Haven't we all? We all want to be. That's why ladies go to the hairdressers. Because they want to have pretty hair so their husbands will think they're beautiful. Ladies, you don't have to fix your hair for your husbands to know you're beautiful. You already are. We wouldn't marry you if we didn't think you were. For goodness sake, right? But it's always nice to get a compliment. But there is a time when we must say, I need to speak the truth. My wife always says to me, before we go to church, although she's not here today, before we go to church, we'll sit in the car. Before I even start the car, she'll put the visor down on the passenger side, in which there's a mirror, and she'll give herself one quick look over. I don't know if y'all do that or not, ladies. No, but she does. She'll look in it, and she'll go like this, like that, and then she'll flip the visor up, and then she'll very calmly look at me, and I'm ready to go, because we're always late. My wife is always late. She's never been on time for anything in her life that I can really remember. God bless her. She's worth waiting for, by the way. But then she'll turn to me, and I'm already got the car in reverse. I'm ready to rock and roll, baby. And she'll turn to me and she'll say, honey, now tell me honestly, do I have too much makeup on? And I'm like, what? Now, that is a fear I know about. My wife likes to look nice. She looks beautiful. I don't care what time of the day or night. But we all like to look good, and women do it, men do it, you know. Children have to be trendy, you know. Everybody wants to be liked, appreciated. It's part of our human nature. But it complements fear of rejection. There's a young woman in our church who, God bless a young woman, she's a little off the wacky side. It takes one to know her, so I know her. and she'd come to church every week with different color hair. Now, I'm not talking about blonde or black or brunette. I'm talking about chartreuse, purple, red, orange, rainbow. And she did it because she's just trying to get a rise out of people, I think. She's a bit of a rebel. I can appreciate that. But she didn't care whether people didn't like her or not. Her approval was in heaven. We do that. We need to seek approval in heaven, not the approval of men. The next hour, I want to encourage you that we need to redouble our faithfulness, truth-speaking, in love. And I would encourage you to remember the quote at the bottom of the page, truth without love is brutality. That's what's wrong with a lot of the protesters. It's truth, especially Christian protests. It's truth, but it's not done in love. Many times, not always, but many times. And love without truth is hypocrisy. That's a fine line to walk. And that's what God calls us to walk. Thank you, Jesus, for your word in the book of Samuel. We thank you for Samuel, for his faithful testimony as he helped guide the nation of Israel to grow and follow you. And even thank you for the record of their failures, so we might not repeat those same failures, but be encouraged encouraged that we need, as they, to fear God and not man. Not to fear the creepy crawler things in the bottom of a wheelbarrow, but to fear the Lord who created all there is, ever has been. That we might glorify His name in our lives. We thank Him